There he is.
I couldn't find it. Lenny.
Morning, everybody. Morning. What's everybody doing this morning? The one thing I know everybody has on their plate, probably based on what the dinner talked about last night, was what? Bacon. Very good. That tells me how many people were there last night. It was a fantastic night last night. I'm not going to get into the bios too long, because the truth of the matter is these folks' bios and the accomplishments that they've had ranges a wide range of accomplishments. But what I want to do with this 30 seconds or so is orient you to what you should be paying attention to. I know that the federal issues are sexy. That's the stuff that makes you read your news on your phones. That's the thing that makes you turn on the television. That's the thing that has you screaming at the radio when you hear something crazy, right? But the truth of the matter is, our founding fathers put a 10th Amendment in the Constitution for a reason. The states are the incubators of innovation. Those are the places where the ideas bubble to the top. That's where you get success. That's where the brightest of the brightest in America comes to light and makes peers across the country go, oh, maybe we should do tax reform like North Carolina did. Oh, they said they couldn't get public sector union reform in the Rust Belt, but look at what Wisconsin did. And if they could do it in those places, maybe we can do it in Pennsylvania, because after all, Republicans in Wisconsin will never allow a Republican presidential candidate to win Wisconsin. They might win Ohio, but definitely not Michigan and Wisconsin. And heaven forbid we know about Pennsylvania. The states know what they're doing. So what I want you to do when you're listening to Matt and Anna, Pat and Tom, I want you to listen to the ideas. And I need you to dream. This is not a place to come with a closed mind. This is not a place just to eat your bacon and meet some cool people and take some lovely pictures. She has to take pictures of me because we have to go back to work on Monday. Which is lovely. Other than that, you're here to learn. You're here to dream. You're here to push people. The gubernatorial candidates, lieutenant governor candidates, the House candidates, the Senate candidates, federal and state. Push for that innovation. Dream with them and let them know that that's their responsibility and our responsibility as Americans and as Pennsylvanians. So can you do that with me for this next 45 minutes or so? Yes. We gave you bacon. I got to hear you say yes. Yes. There we go. Matt, I'm going to start with you. You've had an opportunity to see some reform in an area where it was not supposed to happen. But one of the things I want you to initially start talking about is not only the reform that you saw, but the build up to it. Explain to these folks that reform is sweet, but it's a recipe that takes a lot of experimentation, and sometimes the first couple of batches don't turn out so well.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lenny, for that question. My name is Matt Batzel. I'm the National Executive Director for American Majority. We are a conservative training organization, so we focus really on the grassroots and the candidate level to train up people to run for office and to run effectively, run good campaigns, know how to hold elected officials accountable. And so I'm actually from Susquehanna, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania native, went to Franklin and Marshall College. And so it's great to be back here at Pennsylvania Leadership Conference. I came as a student way back in the day and have been back several times. Moved to Wisconsin with my wife. We've got 5 kids and thought we should try to do something to make Wisconsin a little bit better. This is before 2010 wave came about. It certainly wasn't just me, but there was a lot of people that were looking to turn around a state. The birthplace of the progressive movement is Wisconsin, right? And so in the early 20th century, they experimented with all these reforms. And so there were a lot of conservative donors, activists, candidates. There was a Milwaukee County executive named Scott Walker who wanted to do something different and wanted to try to turn things around. And before I go any further, I really should thank former President Barack Obama. He was really the catalyst, I think, for conservatives taking over Wisconsin, seeing how bad and dysfunctional Washington was. Wisconsinites wanted to go in a different direction. And so in 2010 election, we had a lot of different ideas, and there was a competitive race. Obviously, it was a wave election. But Wisconsinites really chose to go in a different direction, I think, more than any state in the country in 2010. And so, with that election happening, there were a lot of ideas. There were a lot of bold ideas, certainly from Governor Walker, but from the conservative infrastructure as well that was built up and invested in. And they came up with ideas like collective bargaining reform. So Act 10 is what we call collective bargaining reform in Wisconsin. It's the bill that was passed. And you may remember seeing all these protests and these rallies in our state capitol in Madison. Well, I was one of the guys that was there organizing the counter rally, to organize the I Stand With Walker rally, to try to speak up and stand up for collective bargaining reforms that are common sense and will save the taxpayers money. And yes, you can clap for that. And so, we had people probably from Pennsylvania. We certainly had teachers from Chicago and all over the country coming in to say, no, you can't do this. This is something you cannot touch. And you know what? The voters, well, first of all, we got Act 10 passed, but the voters rewarded conservatives for being bold and taking action that actually helped the state of Wisconsin. And so, I go all over the country. I train people on how to get involved. And so I'll have a few lessons for you in a bit. But there are a lot of ways you can be involved in the process. You have to be supportive of those who have these big, bold ideas. You have to understand them. You have to communicate them. You have to tell stories about how they actually help individuals, not just you, but you want to help to show how these are helping people all across the state. So we had Act 10, we had collective bargaining reforms. The big union bullies basically came in and tried to say, no, you can't do this. We passed Act 10. We won election. We won the recalls. We won the 2012 gubernatorial recall, state senate recalls. We won in 2014. We had a midterm election. And then in 2016, you were talking about this. Wisconsin went red in the presidential election for the first time since 1984, when President Reagan won 49 states. And so we're seeing, what's going on there. We've had a lot of grassroots activism is really where it bubbles up from. A strong grassroots. American Majority has helped to train, but there are so many people that stood up and said, enough is enough. We want to do something different. We want to do something that puts the taxpayer back in charge. We had strong, bold elected officials. We also had this conservative infrastructure, a lot of different groups like Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, the MacGyver Institute, media trackers that were created to help to push ideas, to think, but also to expose what the left was doing. So one of the things that we did, right to work passed in Wisconsin in 2014. Prevailing wage reform, which is basically an arbitrary union boosted wage, about 20%. Every public construction project costs about 20% more when we had the prevailing wage in place. And that was coupled with right to work and was repealed in Wisconsin. That was a huge milestone as well. In that particular case, we had a special election where State Senator Dewey Strobel ran on right to work and prevailing wage reform. And it was a Republican primary that decided what was happening, but he won that. And all of a sudden, people in the state Senate realized there's a majority now that wants to pass these reforms. And so, it was the grassroots supporting these people. It was candidates running on bold ideas. It was talk radio. It's the conservative infrastructure. It's also learning how to use social media effectively and also getting out the vote, learning how to dominate on the ground game. So, maybe we'll come back to some of these things a little bit. I don't want to talk for too long, but there's this recipe and there's all these pieces that come together. And every individual can have a role in helping Pennsylvania or your own state to pass these bold reforms. You have to be involved. You have to find the right leaders. You have to learn how to use social media, how to persuade your friends and your neighbors about the issues, but also how to vote. And all these things come together. It takes a lot of hard work, a lot of time. Pennsylvania, there is hope on the horizon. There's a lot of good things that can happen. It's good to hear some of the candidates speaking today. But conservative reforms, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of dedication. And I know you guys are up to the task.
Matt, you keep talking about it takes a lot of time. And every time you said that, Anna, who's down in North Carolina, squirmed in her chair. And it's because, and I can relate to that, because I was down in North Carolina. I'm a Davidson College alum, spent about 10 years down there. And I remember when North Carolina was on the other side of what you all experience now, as far as North Carolina being a red state, run by conservatives, being one of the best business states in the union. Well, there was a time, and Pennsylvanians, you think you've had heartburn here with the blue wave and the blue state. Don't talk to Ann about it, because the left ran the General Assembly from the late 1800s to 2010. And they controlled the governor's mansion for about 80 to 90% of that period of time. So what type of policies did you think you got from them? Well, I can tell you, and Anna will give you more details. policies that made North Carolina the worst business climate in the South and one of the worst in the country. Anna sits up here proudly because of the accomplishments that she's had, with North Carolina being roughly considered one of the top 3 in the nation now. Anna, can you talk about that journey? Because it was painful. It's much like what Matt said, probably times 10. But based on where the state is now, they're experiencing success from the shore to Charlotte and beyond.
Sure, absolutely. And again, my name is Anna Bevan Gravely. I'm with Americans for Prosperity in North Carolina. And I think in order to really set the groundwork and to let you guys see, I mean, you have a perfect summary of how terrible things were. But in 2010, we had a Democrat governor. And then that was the year that the Republicans gained a majority in the General Assembly. In 2012, they gained a supermajority in the General Assembly, and we had a Republican governor for the first time since Reconstruction. And in 2014, we maintained the supermajority, even picked up some seats. In 2016, and then we lost the governor's mansion to a Democrat. So there was this period of time where it was what we all thought was going to be the Shangri-La, with supermajority in the House and the Senate, with Republicans, freedom-oriented individuals, as well as a Republican governor. And so what happened with the policy on the policy side, while all this change was taking place in Wisconsin, in 2010, we had a $3.2 billion budget deficit. And the General Assembly at that point was just a majority. They decided that it was important for them to balance the budget and to repeal this temporary sales tax. And 2010 was the first time that we had a veto override of a budget, and the governor of a different party was required to follow through on that budget override. That happened again in 2016. And so we go from having a budget deficit to then coming in 2013, where we had all these major tax reforms. That was the big, big year for us. We had the largest tax cut in state history, only bested by 2017's tax cut, which was the real largest tax cut in state history. And with that, we went from having one of the lowest, the highest corporate tax rate in the Southeast of 6.9% to now in January of 2019, it'll be 2.25%, which is phenomenal. Yeah. And on the personal income side, we had a 3-tier tax bracket, the highest being 7.75%. Yeah, 7.75%. And then in January of 2019, it'll be 5.25%, which is phenomenal that it's going that low. It's a flat rate. And so additionally with that, from the ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, we went from being ranked 23 with pre-tax reform and before 2013 tax reform to ranked 3rd, best state to do business. And then back in ranking after ranking, going from 44 with the nonpartisan tax foundation to number 11. When they do the 2019, we're sure to break into the top 10. But we're seeing lots and lots of reforms that are taking place on the tax code side. And what's remarkable is that we're not just seeing our personal income tax and our corporate tax rate go down and become more competitive so that we put more money in the pockets of taxpayers, because it's amazing how that works, right? When you put more money in the pockets of taxpayers and they get to keep what they've earned. But we're also seeing that we're reining in spending. In the last 3 budgets that we've had, we've experienced a revenue surplus, as well as a budget surplus. So not only are we taking in less, but our state is growing to encourage us to reduce taxes again. Tax reform is one of the biggest things that I think that North Carolina has done really, really well, and is a model for other states, and also the national narrative. And one thing that we've seen be really successful is that we didn't just cut taxes once. We came back and did it. We controlled spending. We watched where we made difficult decisions to cut in the budget, and we supported our lawmakers who made these bold reforms to the point where we're changing culture within our lawmakers, which is phenomenal that we can talk about such a culture change. So when we, example of that, in 2017, when the Senate presented their tax plan and the House presented their tax plan, the Senate's, which was the most aggressive, was a $1 billion tax cut, where 99% of North Carolinians would receive a tax cut. And the House side, theirs was like $385 million tax cut. And we were like, oh yeah, definitely the $1 billion is what we want. And then we just took a second, we were like, wait, either way, we're getting a tax cut. Like, this is the culture that we've fostered, and the brave actions of our lawmakers just to want a tax cut continually, because they're seeing that it's being successful. The ranking system ranked #1 for business by Forbes just last summer. And there are many, many more. We're in the top 3 of Site Magazine, CEO Magazine, Forbes. And it just continues to prove and reinforce the kind of methodology that we've had in North Carolina.
Thank you, Anna. And we're talking a lot about legislation and how it impacts a business culture. The legislation also impacts law and justice and freedom, because we're here also about freedom, right? Because the larger theme is not just business freedom, but it's about freedom overall, right? Perhaps you've had an opportunity to see this, look at it from a national standpoint. In one of the places when you start thinking about free markets being oppressed and freedoms being oppressed, you start talking about the democratic machine, particularly start thinking about places such as Illinois. You and I had a chance to talk about that. I've lived a lot of places, folks. So I've had a chance to live in Illinois and see the difference between a state that's on the cusp, such as Pennsylvania, versus a state that is just mired. Can you talk a little bit about that national perspective in an area where, in fact, people are struggling just to break through with some of the things that right across the border, Wisconsin's now enjoying?
Yeah, so I'm very jealous of my 2 panelists, because we are nowhere near the great reforms that they've accomplished in Wisconsin and in North Carolina. I'm 49 years old, and the Democrat Illinois Speaker of the House, Mike Madigan, has been the Speaker of the House since I was about 3 years old, almost continuously. There was a 2-year period where he was not Speaker, and he controls all of the legislative practice and everything that's happened in the state since that time. We've had Republican governors come and go. We have a Republican governor now, ostensibly. He's ostensibly Republican. I think anyone who's seen National Review has seen that he was the worst Republican governor in the country. And the Democrats in Illinois are very bad. The problem is that the Republicans are, potentially worse, because they're doing the bidding oftentimes of the Democrats. And so we're the opposite of North Carolina. We have the highest property taxes in the nation. We have $130 billion in unpaid pension liabilities to public sector unions. And so legislatively in Illinois, it's difficult, even with a Republican governor. It's difficult because we have minorities, no longer a super minority in the House, but minorities in both legislative chambers. So in 2011, I and a couple of other freedom fighters in Illinois, Dan Proft and John Tillman, formed a variety of entities, but among them the Liberty Justice Center. And Liberty Justice Center is designed because we have such a terrible time in Illinois passing legislation, seeing if there's a way to attack bad laws through the legal process. And interestingly, when you have complete control of the lawmaking process by a party, by people who have been egregious over periods of time, they get very, very aggressive, right? They start to think that there's no check and there's no balance and they can do whatever they want. And that's what's happened in Illinois. And so we started the process of being able to push back legally on some of those things. Most notably, and I think the one that's going to have the biggest impact, and I'm sure why I'm here today, is I'm the attorney for Mark Janus. Does anybody know what Janus versus Astley is? So So in Illinois, like in many states, we're not right to work. And public sector union members, including my client, Mark Janis, even if they're not in a union, because you're not required to be in a union, they have to pay what are called agency fees, or what the unions call fair share fees. They're not fair at all. And so coming out of the Friedrichs decision, Justice Scalia sadly died. Our case was the case that was next in line, with the concept that, look, it is a violation of your First Amendment rights to free speech and free association to be forced to pay for political speech you don't agree with, to be forced to associate with groups you do not want to associate with. And everything that a public sector union does, and the public sector unions control Illinois in large measure, is political. When they go and collectively bargain for their contracts and for their benefits, they're asking for taxpayer dollars. They're asking for their piece of the pie. In any other context, it would be called lobbying. And so Mark Janis didn't want to pay the agency dues. And so we fought it at the district court level, and we lost. We fought it at the Seventh Circuit level, and we lost. And we had to lose because there was the decision from 1977, Abood, the Supreme Court decision that controlled. But in February, as I'm sure many of you read, we went to the Supreme Court. I had the great pleasure of escorting Mark up the steps of the Supreme Court. I didn't argue the case that was argued by Bill Messenger at National Right to Work Legal Foundation. He did an incredible job. And if Justice Gorsuch goes the way that we hope and think that he will, that will be a major, major thing, because then people will be free to opt out of paying agency dues to a union. And what does that do? So what does that do? Well, it does a couple of things. Number one, it makes workers more free. And I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat or independent or Green Party or whatever. If you're a worker, public sector, private sector, you should be as free as possible. Free as possible to choose and make decisions for yourself. Number two, it forces, look, we're not looking to abolish unions or public sector unions, not at Liberty Justice Center. It'll force union leadership and those who are participating in that process to provide more services, to be more competitive so that they attract people to their cause, not force them to participate. And lastly, it allows for more appropriate ways in which the money that otherwise is being spent through forced unionization on mostly politics to be spent in the way that the person wants it to be spent in their local community or in the politics of their choosing. And so when you can't win legislatively, Lenny, and we're making some strides in Illinois to do that, you have to take other tacks. And so hopefully that case will help all of us across the country, but it's the type of thing that in Illinois we're forced to do until we can get our political house in order, which is a work in progress.
Thank you, Pat. And we've had three good examples, please. We've had three good examples of showing how statewide reforms have found their way to capture national attention and make national change. I mean, Wisconsin led this wave. A lot of what we do at the Commonwealth Foundation is based off of the successes in Wisconsin. North Carolina has been able to lead the way to show states, look, you can be behind the curve for decades and catch up relatively quickly. One of the things I shamefully talk about is when I first went to Davidson College, Charlotte and Pittsburgh were the same size as far as population. Charlotte is now 3 times the size of Pittsburgh in a very relatively short period of time. You know, with what Pat's saying, there are ways to look at the strangulation that you see at the state government level if you make sure that the legal justice that you have is applied appropriately. Now, Tom, you've had a chance to interact with this stuff on both sides. You've been a legislator, and now you're on the other side of this, looking from the outside in. Can you give a little bit of perspective as to the unique perspectives that you have because you were in office, dealing with these statewide issues, and now you're trying to influence folks to say, listen, based on my experiences, these are the best ways to help Oklahoma and then subsequently help the nation?
Great. Well, thanks, Lenny. Tom Newell, I served in the Oklahoma House of Representatives for 6 years. I left the House to join FGA, the Foundation for Government Accountability. And it goes back to what you said earlier about the states being laboratory of reform. And FGA is focused on replacing the failed health care and welfare policies around the nation. And we're focused on that not just because of what those failed policies are doing to state budgets, but also because of what they're doing to individuals. We believe highly in the value and dignity of work. And we believe that when you pay people not to work, it's not just costing taxpayers, it's costing that individual and their families in exponential ways. And so in just the last few years, FGA has helped pass reforms in 34 different states, primarily around these failed welfare policies so far, which has freed and going to free about 4.5 million people from welfare over the next 4 years, save about $92 billion over the next 10 years. And so it's been exciting to see that happen. And because of that, we've primarily just focused on the states, helping states implement reforms, but now able to leverage those reforms in the state at the federal level. In fact, we're probably going to be seeing President Trump issue an executive order sometime very soon on the dignity of work and implementing work requirements throughout agencies. The Farm Bill is going to be released, going to be having to do some reforms on SNAP, on work requirements in SNAP. USDA is having a comment period right now on some regulatory reform as it relates to work requirements in SNAP. So really think that we have the potential as a result of what the states are doing, not just to help in the states, but now to reform the country as well. And in Pennsylvania alone, there's a lot of reforms that could happen that we're seeing happen in other states that Pennsylvania could do. For instance, work requirements for food stamps or SNAP. Now, there's already work requirements in place, but the states have the freedom to waive those requirements. And Pennsylvania is one of the many states that waive those requirements. They've brought back the requirements in a few of the counties, but the majority of the counties still, there are no work requirements for food stamps. And when we say work requirements, it's really you work 20 hours a week, you volunteer, or you go through job training. So it's not just work, but it's what some call community engagement. It's getting out of the house and doing something. And we saw that the states that have brought back those work requirements now, seeing tremendous results. Maine and Kansas were two of the first states that brought back statewide work requirements for able-bodied adults without children on food stamps. And we've seen, we've tracked those things now. We've seen that those people who have gone off food stamps as a result of the work requirements have more than doubled their incomes over the last couple of years. And so it's not, again, just about saving taxpayers' money. It's about the fact that these families are doing much better off than they ever were on food stamps now that they're actually working and gainfully employed. So we really encourage Pennsylvania to bring back work requirements. But we've also been the leading effort behind work requirements for Medicaid. Obviously, Kentucky has had their waiver approved now. Indiana has had their waiver approved. There's 7 or 8 other states in line, either that get their waivers approved or are submitting waivers, and that continues even now throughout legislative sessions. In Oklahoma, the governor has issued an executive order to submit a waiver. The legislature is also working a bill that's actually even stronger work requirements than the governor's executive order. And by the way, this is something that has strong bipartisan support. FGA did a national poll that we've actually submitted the results and briefed both President Trump and Congress on it. But the majority of Republicans, the majority of independents, and even the majority of Democrats support work requirements for welfare. So this is something that even in a state like Pennsylvania is something that's very feasible to get done through grassroots efforts to say, we want work requirements in these issues. That would, again, help people on welfare and help the state save dollars as well. There's another issue that we focus on is welfare integrity. And it's something that actually, you had a previous governor implement a couple of these reforms, and you saw tremendous savings, only to have the current governor get rid of them. And that's what we call stop the scam. And it has to do with doing eligibility audits for those that are on welfare. The federal government has even said under Obama that there can be almost 10% of spending in Medicaid is improper spending. And a lot of that has to do with eligibility. And the key with that is most welfare programs on Medicaid, and Oklahoma is one of them, but many states, they simply say, are you eligible? Sign up. And you can basically just attest that you're eligible. And they say, okay, you're eligible. We'll put you on Medicaid. Well, eligibility, this is not changing eligibility at all, but it's simply saying, well, we're going to do some background checks. We're going to do some checks to make sure that you really are eligible. Make sure that you are not working somewhere and not reporting the income. To make sure that you're alive, literally. To make sure that you're a resident of the state. To make sure you haven't won the lottery. I mean, just things like that. And we're discovering that states that have implemented these reforms, Illinois, believe it or not, a blue state, they did it because they just needed to find money somewhere because of all their other problems. But they implemented these stop the scam reforms and are saving about $400 million annually now because they're finding people who were dead that were receiving Medicaid. finding people, Wisconsin, Michigan, Michigan, I think it was over 7,000 people they discovered had won the lottery, was still receiving Medicaid benefits. Some of these people had actually won $1 million winnings and were still receiving benefits. I mean, so it's those kinds of things, just checking death records, checking lottery winnings, verifying income. You know, nowadays, most of us have like Credit Karma or something like that on our phone. I mean, there's all kinds of information on all of us out there as it relates to those things. So one of the simple things is I might sign up for Medicaid saying I only make $20,000 a year, but I might go buy a car 2 months later and I put on that form that I'm making $40,000 a year. Well, there's all kinds of data tools now that can be flagged and say, hey, wait a minute, they said one thing to you and one thing to another credit agency, welfare agency in your state, you might have checked into these people to see if they're really legit or not. And so we're finding multiple states around the country, blue states, red states, purple states, implementing these kinds of reforms and saving taxpayers real money, getting people back to work. And we just encourage that in Pennsylvania, with the effort of people like you, those kinds of reforms can happen in Pennsylvania as well. I'm excited to partner with you. One of my colleagues, Shannon Alford's in the back corner over there. She's going to be working in Pennsylvania, would love to get with legislators and with grassroots people to show you how you can implement these reforms in Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Tom. We're going to go through a lightning round, so thank you, please. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a question to one of you, and then anybody else can jump in. And the first question is going to basically show everybody that, look, you're seeing this stuff bubble up at the states. I told you that we all know that the national stuff is what usually catches our eye the most. But there's a tie. Anna, you're in North Carolina. One of the reasons why North Carolina put all those reforms in when they finally were able to get control of the General Assembly and get that Republican governor is because South Carolina was kicking their tail when it came to business. As a matter of fact, if you lived in Charlotte, you worked in Charlotte, you lived in South Carolina, which meant that homes were being bought in South Carolina, cars were being bought in South Carolina. They were losing population. Talk about the regional impact of North Carolina making those reforms and how it made South Carolina better, how it made Tennessee better, how it even made Virginia better.
Yeah, so we're seeing this, I believe, if I recall correctly, this past session, South Carolina was starting to suggest and to look to make a change in their corporate and personal income tax that mirrored that of North Carolina. And you're exactly right, North Carolina was the whole of misery for quite some time. And now we have the lowest personal income tax outside of states that have zero, and also the lowest corporate tax rate in the Southeast. In addition to that, we're also seeing the fact that we've nearly quadrupled our standard deduction, which still blows my mind when I say that out loud because that seems unreal that it happened in such a short period of time. But the fact that North Carolina continues to push and knock on the door of more conservative reforms really is driving other states to look at what they're doing in their legislatures and what they're losing because more and more people are moving to North Carolina. We are seeing that we're the #1 best state to do business, as I mentioned before, and all the rankings. And that's just being backed up by the fact that we do have more and more businesses that are coming to North Carolina from out of state, but we also have a lot of businesses that are starting within North Carolina because they're community businesses. Because when you lower the corporate rate, you're creating a fair environment for all businesses. So it's encouraging more and more homegrown businesses, if you will, to emerge and to hire local talent.
And I'm gonna play a dynamic that you all may not be aware of. So in 2011, everybody remembers the big brouhaha in Wisconsin and all the controversies and the protests that were going on in Wisconsin, and how they couldn't get the vote done in Wisconsin because they couldn't find the Wisconsin legislators. Does anybody remember that? Okay, I was in Illinois as a radio show host at the time, and I can assure you that I know people there that knew exactly where they were hiding those legislators. They were hiding them in Illinois.
They're hiding at the hotel in Rockford, Illinois.
There you go. So talk for a second, you two, about the irony of the fact that the public sector union reforms that were going on in Illinois or in Wisconsin was being protested against, being locked away in Rockford, Illinois. And now the Janus case is centering out of Illinois as a result of what happened in Wisconsin. Talk about that for a second, because that ties into the theme of the incubators of innovation at the state level.
Yeah, I think it goes to the spillover effect. If you do reform in one state, people in neighboring states in the same area are going to see that and want to have that sort of thing. In Wisconsin, we had a $3.6 billion deficit. Collective bargaining reforms solved that budget hole that was there. And yes, the legislators fled the state. And one of the things that I think was particularly helpful in Wisconsin is shining a spotlight on the left's union intimidation tactics on normal people, whether it's protesting. Probably the most egregious in Wisconsin is the death threats and protesting at a Special Olympics ceremony simply because Governor Walker was going to be speaking there. They did a zombie die-in. A bunch of students went in. And it just was egregious. And people were like, this is absolutely crazy. And whether it was teachers coming from Illinois, I'm sure probably some came from all over the country, even from Pennsylvania, people all of a sudden realized what in the world is going on, and how can we stop this? How can we do these things? So whether it's right to work passing in Michigan or the Janus case in Illinois, other states see these things and want to learn what's happening and help to bring about reforms.
Yeah, and it's more than just them, and I agree with that. It's more than just them wanting to learn. They're forced to. So in Illinois, we are surrounded by Wisconsin and by Indiana and Michigan and Missouri and Kentucky and all these states that are better economically than we are. And when you're not protected by an ocean and people can pack up the U-Haul and literally go next door, and I have news for you. In Indiana, they have parks and schools just like we have in Illinois. You can just pick up your family and go. And so for us, that's exactly what's happening. We're literally the hole in the donut. And in this past presidential election, you see that we are a state, and I mentioned this to the folks on the panel before I came in here. Illinois is a very unusual state. It's Chicago, which is where I'm from. And then you go south of I-80, right? Just a little bit south of Chicago. And the rest of the state is Tennessee or Alabama. It's a very different state culturally. It's a very different state in terms of people's politics. Illinois is mostly Democrat in major urban areas, and Chicago dominates that. And so we've been slow to learn the lessons that our neighbors are teaching us. And the reason is the political will isn't there, because what the people in our state are doing, and I suspect this is true in New York and California and to a certain extent here, although you guys are emerging, is that the politicians like it the way that it is. Because even though it doesn't serve you, it serves them. It serves their union constituencies. It serves their ability to get reelected into office. It allows them to, at least in our case, collect legislator pensions that are in the millions of dollars, right? They want it this way, at least in our state. And so when we see good states like Wisconsin reforming and Michigan reforming, it's frustrating because out-migration is heading to those states because of how easy it is. And so hopefully there'll be enough of that to help us reform. But that's the pressure that North Carolina is putting on South Carolina. That's the pressure that Wisconsin's putting on other neighboring states, including us.
Interesting point, because I'm talking about pressure. I know you're going to go in that direction, Tom, but I also want to talk about the pressure that folks like people out here today, the wonderful bacon-eating people that are here this morning, that they can put on the system to put these innovative reforms into place so that the politicians don't get comfortable, so that they don't stay in their cultural bubble, keep things status quo, and then have them looking around at their neighbors. Where we can do, for example, stuff here in Pennsylvania with the Commonwealth Foundation and other organizations to move the window of political opportunity to greater and greater things.
Yeah, Lenny, as a state rep, just to echo what they were saying, we would oftentimes look at what Texas was doing, no income tax state. So we lowered income taxes in Oklahoma. So you are looking at what other states are doing. As I work with legislators now around the country, one of the first questions I get about some of our reforms is, what other states are doing this? Because legislators are acutely aware of what other states are doing, learning from other states, sometimes being guilted by other states doing it. Even on some of our reforms that are bipartisan now, and we can report, hey, Illinois passed this reform with majority of Democrats voting for it, or this is a reform that just passed the Tennessee Senate, unanimously. So it's easy to point to those things, and that makes a real difference. And the other is the grassroots. We partner with So we're a unique think tank, and we're a C3, but we also have a partner C4. So we even hire lobbyists in some of our states. And then we also partner with AFP in states and NFIB and other groups to build grassroots support. So when a legislator is hearing what other states around them are doing, and then they're hearing from their own people, we should do this, that's a winning combination. In Oklahoma, we just passed, it was the very first bill signed by the governor this year, Stop the Scam in Oklahoma. Well, the welfare agency in Oklahoma is kind of its own standalone unit. They don't even really report to the governor. And they had legislators convinced that they were already doing Stop the Scam stuff, when in reality they weren't. Well, what was great to point out was Arkansas just finished an audit. They announced the results in December of this last year, that they removed 80,000 people from their Medicaid rolls. Almost 28,000 of those were receiving benefits from more than one state. Well, Arkansas is right on the border with Oklahoma, so it was very easy for us to say, I wonder how many of those 28,000 were receiving benefits from Oklahoma as well. And so it gave real ammunition for the legislature to think, I don't think the agency's telling us the whole truth here. And so that kind of peer pressure really makes a huge difference on legislators.
You brought up the word winning. And a lot of times my colleague and I at Commonwealth Foundation, we often talk about what does success look like, right, Liz? I want you each to take a moment and tell these good people what winning and what success look like at different phases of the game. Pat, I'm going to start with you. You brought up the perfect example. You lost at the district level. You lost at the appellate level because you knew you had to get to the Supreme Court level all over again. The win was to get to the Supreme Court. Can you talk a little bit about what that feels like? Because there's a lot of good people here that they feel like they're taking lumps. Explain to them that they're not necessarily lumps.
Yeah, no, and I felt like I've taken lumps over the years, so I understand that. I think we all do. It's a great point. Sometimes it is very tough, and you just have to get up the next day and say, okay, we lost this one, we're going to go on to the next one. In Illinois, for example, and that's how we ultimately got to the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get this watershed moment for all of us come June. We just had a very hotly contested Republican primary in our state. Our governor, who's the passed sanctuary state legislation for our state, is the first governor to pass public funding of abortion in a state, public funding. And it is a Republican, if you can believe that. The Democrats wouldn't do it. And we lost the primary by about 2 percentage points, a wonderful legislator that would have been an incredible governor. And so it's been 2 weeks since that giant disappointment. And the next morning, it feels like it's over. But it's not over. You got to get up and go on, because the things that we all believe in, the things that we all fight for, the things that you guys do and work for and why you're here, those things are eternal and they're right. So if you get up every day and keep fighting for them, ultimately, we're going to win along the way. And in the end, I think we're going to ultimately win big.
And I would add, so what winning looks like in Wisconsin and elsewhere, building up the farm team of local elected officials, people that are running locally, those are the people that are likely to run for state office. And so if you're having problems with your state legislature, you need to get better people there. And you need to have people that are running locally, gaining experience, that are working with the taxpayers and their constituents, and are held accountable and doing good reforms even at the local level. Those people you want to promote up to the state legislature, maybe run statewide for opportunities down the road. So that's part of the success is getting the right people. It's great to have a governor who can do certain things, but you need a state legislature that's going to actually vote those things in. And at the grassroots level, you can help to find those people when there are open seats are really generally the best chances to improve legislators. Sometimes you need a primary challenge, other things like that. But that's what winning looks like. And just real quick, in Wisconsin, we just lost a very contentious Supreme Court race. And so we are looking at how do we double down and improve for the fall, because it seems like there's a blue wave coming.
Folks, and what you probably have heard the whole time, and first, give them a round of applause. Thank them for their brilliance and their work in the community. Thank all three of them. What you have to take away from this is we have the tools right here in Pennsylvania. We have the excitement right here in Pennsylvania. We can influence the region and the country right here in Pennsylvania. So get with these individuals, ask them questions. Of course, you know that we're here at the Commonwealth Foundation. We're working with you all regularly. We appreciate you all support and working with you to bring these reforms here. We love Pennsylvania. We believe in Pennsylvania. and it's time for Pennsylvania to go to that next level like they have taken their states. So thank you so much for being here. God bless you all.